When I was assaulted at creche, my mom, my brother, and his friends, they went on a manhunt looking for this man. Even as an adult, if something were to happen to me, I wouldn't necessarily have the confidence to even go to the police station. I was raised by my older brother, who was 21 at the time. I was 9 years old. After you have a baby, you feel all kinds of things about your body. Like, this is now sagging when it used to sit a certain way. Now, hey, now you are asymmetrical, not symmetrical anymore.
Hi, and welcome to By the Way podcast, where we explore interesting ideas with different people who care. My name is Liz Letsalo, and I'm the host, and I'm joined today by Palesa Phake, who I'm super, super excited to be talking to. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so interesting thing before we get into it. When I was looking at your journey and reading your bio, looking at all the interesting things that you do, and I saw your pageantry, obviously history, and you've made it to top 15 in Miss SA. And I thought, damn, girl, I don't know if you know this, but I was also in a different lifetime a pageant
Really?
I was a pageant girl. I've only made it as far as Miss Limpopo though. And I think after coming into reality with my height, I thought, okay, fine, it's fine. I can let it go. But yeah, good to have you. So I'm going to remind you of who you are in case you have forgotten. I don't think you have, but I'm just going to remind you who you are. You have founded Propel Advisory, which is a business consulting agency. You have also founded one of my one of my favorite NGOs or organizations, Set in Motion. I am such a huge fan, which is essentially an organization that equips children, parents, and caregivers around body safety, consent, and boundaries to reduce the occurrence of childhood sexual abuse. You have just been selected as one of 2023's cohort on the Mail and Guardian 200 Young South Africans under the Civil Society Organization. And of course, you were Miss South Africa top 15. Is this all surreal to hear?
It is. I still feel like I have a very long way to go, but I think I've done pretty decently to this point.
Come on.
Don't make me shy, please.
So I'm saying, where did it all begin? What's the story of Palesa, basically?
My name is Palesa Phake. I am 26 years old. And my story, I always like to say, started when I was around 7 or 8. So I was raised by a single parent. I have one other older brother, and my mom started experiencing some health issues from the time I was about 8. So from that time, she was sort of in and out of the hospital. And I think that's sort of where my journey into independence, at times hyper-independence, started. And by the time I was 9, my mom had passed, and so had my dad. So I was raised by my older brother, who was 21 at the time I was 9 years old. And yeah, we've sort of just maneuvered our way through life together till this point. Yeah.
You guys have done a badass job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think based on the stats and what normally happens to children that are orphaned at a young age, I always say that it's 100% the grace of God that I am the woman that I am today. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to start off the podcast so deep already.
I'm ready.
But it's definitely by the grace of God that, I've sort of kept my life together,
And having been raised by a sibling, does that alter the nature of the relationship? What's your relationship with your brother like?
It definitely does, because I think my brother had to play a lot of different roles. He had to be a brother, he had to be a father, and at times a mother, I guess. So where I could see that the relationship was a bit distorted is actually when I was getting married, because he had a pretty difficult time letting go. He had a pretty difficult time letting go, because I think to him, he raised me like his own child, So even with the whole process of the lobola negotiations and me welcoming my first child, and just all the transitions that I had to go through. I think that was a bit challenging for him because he was trying to find the balance between him being an older brother and also being the person that raised me, basically my parent. Yeah.
And how do you then, when someone has given so much of themselves to you and has been so generous and so helpful and so supportive, especially when they were young, and I guess now that you're where you are and you're your age, you can retrospectively look at that and go, wow, what a human.
Right.
What does that feel like to you to sit with that knowledge that someone actually went that route for you?
I think that's a feeling that I've sat with from the time I was 21, because my brother started taking care of me when he was 21. And at the time, I couldn't imagine having to raise a 9-year-old child. So I think even as I've grown older, I give him a lot of grace now in a lot of the mistakes that he made while he was raising me, because I understand, I get it. He didn't sign up to be a parent at the time. I was literally his sister. It would have been a different story if I was his biological daughter, because then the responsibilities would have been different, or my expectations from him would have been a bit different, right? But I think as I've grown older, I'm so shocked. I'm shocked at the fact that he managed to keep himself together. He managed to get married. He has a daughter whom he loves dearly, and he is successful in his own right. So, yeah, I think based on the relationship that I have with my niece right now, in a way, I always feel like that's me sort of giving thanks to my brother, because my niece and I have a very, very close relationship. But yeah, just a lot of grace now looking back at some of the mistakes that he made, and yeah.
Yeah, sure. That's a beautiful story, I think, of siblinghood, and of I think family. But let's talk about your Miss SA journey.
Okay.
There's one thing I'm always curious about people who go particularly into the Miss SA journey. Oftentimes we have friends and we know people around the internet or social media, and then they enter Miss SA. And because the journey has now gone so public, they almost get thrust into this beautiful life that looks like, it's a very limelight driven. They're doing shoots. It's almost like a build up to even during the selection process. For people who come out of the journey, maybe obviously there's attrition. For people who maybe come out of the journey, especially having gone up to top 15, for example, and you were sort of living a different life for a moment, even snapping out of that and coming back into the real world. Is that a thing that is a struggle, or is your life forever changed by that experience?
My life was definitely forever changed by the experience, but I think the transition back into what people would call a normal life wasn't really a thing for me, because I entered during COVID. So even my entry video was filmed at home in my brother's bedroom. I didn't have a tripod, so I had books stacked up to hold my phone.
No way.
Our interviews were done online. I believe I only met the organization once, and that's when we did our top 15 photo shoot. So for me, the transition back into my normal life wasn't that bad. But my online social media presence definitely grew a lot. And I think my visibility with brands as well was impacted by my journey. Although I will say I had so much anxiety throughout the entire process. I think I don't know what I was expecting to happen. Because you're entering Miss South Africa during COVID, so a lot of people were on their phones. And I think it's probably one of the most successful years that the organization has had to date. So the attention was incredibly overwhelming. I was completing my honors degree as well at the time. I was doing my honors degree full-time while also trying to juggle radio interviews and workshops at the organization and photo shoots. It was a lot for me. And believe it or not, I'm actually quite an introvert. And the funny thing is, a lot of the work that I do does require for me to be out into the public. but I am 100% an introvert.
So what's then the impact of you just being so out in the public on your body, on your mind, on your sense of being? Is it something that still feels like a pleasure to do, but maybe you're just tired, or do you feel like, yo, it's a job that I just must crack through?
It's a feeling of both. I won't lie to you. I have become a lot more comfortable being open about even my life and the work that I do. But I obviously still have those moments where I'm like, ish, I wish there was another way. But but yeah, you just find a way to wing it at times.
So let's talk about your work at Set in Motion. I am particularly going to single that initiative out because from the moment I saw that video you posted where you were announcing the initiative and what it's about, and I think my voice is going to crack a little bit because I think it's one of those things that I think is incredibly overlooked. Right. And I think it's also one of those initiatives that don't feel as sexy, as gratifying, and they're also incredibly hard. And I mean, really, really hard to do. Right. How did that thought come to you to even begin this initiative Set in Motion, to just raise awareness about, body agency and sexual abuse in children in particular? How did you just sit and say, this is the core?
Sure. My journey to launching Set in Motion has been, it was quite challenging, but I think what sort of provoked me actually wanting to start the initiative is my son. So I had already been speaking to my husband about wanting to launch Set in Motion while I was pregnant, because I initially wanted to write a children's book based on childhood sexual abuse. And so my husband was like, how about you sort of set the foundation first for the book? The book is something that I'm actually still working on right now. But he said, start an Instagram page, start talking about childhood sexual abuse and the importance of having these conversations with your child, and then build up to writing your book. And so I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to do it before I give birth. Obviously, I didn't. I gave birth to my son, and throughout my postpartum period, it was something that was consistently on my mind. And at the time, I had started therapy as well. I actually started therapy before my son was born, but it was something that I was having a conversation with my therapist, and she was obviously also giving me a bit of guidance in that regard. And then I finally mustered up the courage to launch this initiative. And even as I was doing my research, I remember I would feel very triggered. And I couldn't understand at the time why it would take me 2 weeks to literally just research one topic. And over time, I realized that it was because of my own experience with childhood sexual abuse. And I had briefly spoken to my therapist about it a while before that. And I had also briefly spoken to my husband about it, but it was something that I had never really processed. I had never really spoken to anyone, And up until a few months ago, actually, as I was doing some work with my therapist, I realized that it is something that I have held onto for so long, like my experience, and I've carried so much shame around that experience that even with the work that I was doing at Set in Motion, I was still holding back a lot. So I don't know if I've gone off topic. No, you haven't. So yeah, I would say that the two major inspirations behind Set in Motion would be me having a child and wanting to raise my child in a safe environment, and then obviously my own experience.
And I think one of the things that comes to mind is, the vulnerability then that you feel as a parent, who has this child and you want to protect them. What would you say and you can speak for yourself as a parent and other parents, I guess, just generically, what would you say is a fear, really? And I don't even mean sexually. It's there, we know it, but do you almost crystallize? What does the fear look like, I guess is the question.
Yeah.
Does it look like controlling your child or, overly protecting your child? Does it look like not wanting to send them to school. What is the impact of the fear, and what does that fear actually manifest itself like on a day-to-day basis for parents?
Yeah.
To the point where, as onlookers, people might even end up judging some of the decisions you make around your child, right?
Yeah. So are you asking me, what does the fear of my child being sexually abused look like?
Manifest like in your life as a parent, yes.
So for me, it looks like not really trusting my child with family members other than my husband. For me, it looks like literally having cameras all around our house, especially when we got our first nanny. Cameras were a no-brainer for myself and my husband. It looks like having anxiety when your child has to start creche. It looks like consistently inspecting your child. I still do that today. Like when my child comes back from creche, it manifests in a lot of different ways. I have, like I mentioned, my brother has a daughter. She is turning 9 in August, and I started having these conversations with her even before I launched State in Motion, even before I fell pregnant, because I always had this anxiety that something is going to happen to her because I'm not with her all the time. So from that time, I would teach her that no one is allowed to touch your vagina, no one is allowed to show you their private parts, no one is allowed to show you images of naked people or videos of naked people doing inappropriate things. It also looks like every single time when she comes to visit me, like I sit her down and I'm like, what's been going on? Are you okay? I don't want to like direct you on her. Yeah, like,
yeah.
remember what Auntie Bali taught you? What did Auntie Bali teach you? So I think I mentioned it to you earlier that I would say the downside of me doing this work is the amount of anxiety that comes with it, because you are aware of so many different things that can happen to your child, because also predators are very creative. So something can be happening right in front of your eyes and you wouldn't even know about it.
So what are some of the shocking stats, realities, facts about sexual abuse in children in South Africa?
It's not just in South Africa, but generally the most shocking fact for me when I actually started to do the work is that about 93% of the abuse that a child would experience is from a person that they already know and trust. So as a parent, we normally teach our children about stranger danger, right? But a lot of the times you find that it's an uncle, it's a sibling, it's even a parent, it's a teacher, it's a nanny, So for me, I think that was very shocking to think, wow, like you always think that the danger is far away from your child, but a lot of the times it's within your guys' vicinity.
And what have you, as you were doing the work, what are some of the interesting things you've discovered about, how we then deal with sexual abuse in children? What would you say you've seen from a criminal justice system perspective? Is it easy? Is it difficult? What can you say you've seen from how we handle the issues as family members? And there's the complexity of, here's a breadwinner who's maybe abused someone, or here's someone who's not maybe even a breadwinner, or we're willing to send this person to jail, but we need to make sure that the police arrest this person, because if they don't, and we've handed them over, then there's implications for the victim and also for the family. There's, what are some of these kinds of things that you've seen that perhaps we don't always have the opportunity to talk about it and raise openly and say, these are some of the things that make it difficult for victims to really be heard and for victims to fully get the justice they deserve?
I think, first of all, we know that our justice system is quite flawed. So even as an adult, if something were to happen to me, I wouldn't necessarily have the confidence to even go to the police station because of how strenuous the entire process of even of them opening a docket for you is. So in the case of a child being sexually abused, I'm going to make an example for you. Say I'm a teacher and I recognize that a child is being sexually abused. There is a whole process that you need to go through. So you can't directly go to the SAPS. It needs to be reported to the principal. The principal has to go to the board and district. Like, it's such a long process, which can be quite discouraging. right? It can be quite discouraging. And what you find a lot of the times is that these cases don't really see the light of day. And these children continue to live in that environment where they are being abused. And I think because so many of us have experienced it, there's one of two reactions when you find out that your child or a child that you know is being sexually abused, right? The first one is that a lot of people will either go into shock and they'll shut down. And the second is that some people will overreact.
Oh, okay.
Right? To a point where you become overly protective of the child. You could potentially even compromise the case, and just all of these things can happen because all these emotions come up. So where I come in, where Satan Motion comes in, is helping you find the balance between reacting enough to make sure that a child gets the help that they need should you find out that they have been sexually abused. Because you also still need to use a lot of wisdom, and you kind of need to tread carefully while you are handling such a case, even with the child. If you overreact, the child could shut down, right? If you shut down, then the child won't ever tell you anything again, you know? So, and I think another thing for me that has always bothered me is how, especially within Black families, how we want to just sweep it under the rug. When I was assaulted at creche, my mom went all out, and so did my brother and his friends. They went on a manhunt looking for this man. The police were involved. I was taken to the doctor to get inspected. My mom took me out of the creche. It was a lot. But looking back now, I can 100% appreciate the effort that my mom took in trying to help me out as best as she could. Because even at that time, there wasn't really enough information around how do you help a child that has been sexually abused. You know, even as Black parents, like we don't know those things, you know.
So, were you part of the action when? Were you aware of what was going on?
Mm-mm.
The police, the action that your parents took, the manhunt?
Not at all. I shut down. These are things that my brother had to remind me of. I don't remember even going to the doctor. I don't remember the police. I don't remember any of those details. All I remember is that I got home and I was severely uncomfortable, and I was trying to communicate to my mom that like something is wrong, but obviously I didn't have the language for it. I didn't understand it either. It took my mom a couple of hours to actually figure out what I was trying to say. And then she inspected me during bath time. And then she actually realized that, okay, so this is what my daughter was trying to communicate with me. And then the next day, what I do remember is that the next day we went back to the creche. So my mom went there and she was demanding answers. Yeah. And obviously this was done by the owner's son. So this happened at a creche. And it was actually the owner's son who had assaulted me. And he did it in the presence of his older sister because she was watching the door to make sure that no one would come in. And so my mom went to the creche, obviously demanding answers. And from there, I don't really have any memories of what happened. I do remember being moved to a different school. And I remember having lots of issues. Like I had so much anxiety. I would pee on myself. I was so scared to even raise my hand to ask the teacher to use the loo. And I think those are also signs of a child that has been sexually abused because the trauma shows up in a lot of different ways. I had severe anxiety. I became extremely attached to my mom. And yeah.
And then, I don't know how much work you've actually done with maybe other survivors of sexual assault.
I'm not there yet.
Okay, that's okay. But I guess the question that I wanted to ask was if you would have interacted with people who had family stand up for them, and if you would have interacted with people who told and either were not believed or perhaps were believed but nothing was done for different reasons, right? And if there were any similarities or differences in how they then came to process whatever it is that had gone on. I don't know if you've seen anything as you were maybe looking or researching or doing the work to say, are you able to speak on the impact of maybe a child who speaks and maybe is believed or maybe is not believed, but maybe there's no sense of tangible justice for them? Is it something that people are able to process through their bodily nature? Is it something that maybe obviously people carry well into their future? Is there really a difference that you would have seen that maybe we're not even thinking about, case A where justice has truly been served, and case 2 where we can clearly tell that there's something missing here.
Something missing. Children are very resilient by nature. I think as human beings, we are very, very resilient. After I was assaulted, I didn't receive any psychological help or counseling at all. So my mom did what needed to be done. And then remember, I told you that from the time I was 7, she was in and out of hospital. And this happened when I was around 5 years old. And she was a single parent, so her resources were also limited. But I think because of the amount of support that I received even after my mom passed from other adults who were in my life at the time, really did help me a lot. But then what I did, because I didn't get any psychological help, is that I completely blocked out the memory. So it would be something that would pop up like randomly, like I'd get a trigger and then I'd remember that, oh, this has happened. And then I'd quickly just shut it down, because when I would think about it, I would feel my body go into a panic, right? So with the 2 instances that she spoke about, it obviously helps for a child to get the help that they need if they have been assaulted. But a child's behavior can still be altered in a lot of different ways. Some children can start to become curious about sex at a very young age. Some children grow up to be hypersexual as they get into their teen years. And so your relationship with sex can change quite a lot. I know my relationship with what sex was very much distorted up until I started therapy and I met my husband, and I was like, oh, so this is what intimacy is supposed to look like. Yeah. So with what I've seen then on the opposite end, where a child doesn't get the help that they need, like I said, they can start to even abuse other children as well. So you can start to see a child want to act out. There's this game we used to play when we were kids where we would pretend that I'm the mom, this is the dad, these are the children.
Yeah.
And that is literally the perfect environment for a child to abuse another child, right? The effects can be quite similar, even though a child might have gotten help, or even if they haven't, the effects of what can happen in the future can look quite similar to each other. But you need to remember that children are very resilient, and most times your body does find a way to cope with the trauma that you've been through.
I think that's shocking and interesting, but also a bit of a relief to know that people can still continue to live. Of course, ideally, we want to get into preventative mode, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I want us to talk about. What do we as society, because I feel like children should be society's responsibility. As any adult in any space, I feel that we hold some sort of collective responsibility towards children in the room, children in the space. And I'm not even talking about that's your child, you need to make sure, because people then sometimes feel like I made a decision to not have a child because I don't have the capacity. And I respect that. But I think in any given space where there's like just the generic space, there's some sort of like you need to be able to keep on a child, even if it's not your biological child. What are some of those things that every single adult, and I guess children, have a duty to recognize, understand, and pay attention to in regards to children, just to make sure that we're able to sort of like see what's going on and have other people aware that we can also see what's going on, just to try and keep children safe so we don't get to the point where we have to remedy situations.
Yeah, I think one thing that I always tell my husband is that we all have a joint responsibility towards each other, more so children, like you said. If you suspect that a child is being abused in any way, the Constitution itself even says that you have to report it. That's what the Constitution says. You have to report it, or you need to speak to the relevant authorities if you suspect that a child is being abused. What can happen if you don't do that is obviously that the abuse will continue to happen. And a lot of the times a child does know if you know that something is going on with them. And so that's also secondhand trauma if they know that an adult knows, but they're not actually doing anything about it, or they don't believe them. That can also cause secondhand trauma. But Liz, it's really not an easy thing to do. Hey, a lot of us suffer from the bystander effect. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's basically seeing an injustice happen and you sort of just turn a blind eye because that's what the collective is doing. But even like with the work that I do with Set in Motion, it's not easy at all. I still have my triggers as well. I still have moments where I'm doing research on something and I need some time out because it is so triggering and so unbelievable to know what happens to children, that are not protected. But more than anything, we all have a joint responsibility towards each other.
I think I'm curious to know, here's a person who is sitting so far away and is away something like this is happening. Practically speaking, is it easy to intervene without a child sort of like, guardian's intervention? What are some of the things we can say to empower people, bystanders, to say, I know the system, I know how to navigate it because that's what we want to happen. But also, what are some of the challenges that we can acknowledge and empathize with in relation to some of these people to say, sure, I went to the police this one time and they said, show me the person. And I got there and they said, what are you talking about? We know nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think oftentimes we rely on families to really be the anchor for justice for the children. And in the event that that's not there, how easy or how difficult or how possible or how impossible is it for the man in the village or the man in the same suburb or in the same street to go and say, I've seen something there, I've intervened, and these are ways I know I can or will be supported, even if, the guardian maybe is the main provider, even if this person is against this thing or negates it or, denies it. Are people that empowered, and what does that journey look like?
So this is where I believe that our justice system is a bit flawed.
Okay.
It is quite difficult to take a case further, especially if the child's not yours or if you're not related to them. The best thing that you can do, and might I even say the most important thing you can do, is to report it and to make the family aware that you are aware.
Okay.
Because what you will find a lot of the times is that the family is either not going to believe you and the child, and they're going to think that you are spewing all kinds of lies and imaginations into the child's mind. And then they don't do anything about it. I have a friend who works in early childhood education, and she was telling me about how a lot of teachers will report that a child is being sexually abused, but then nothing is ever done about it. Because for as long as you are not related to that child, you do not necessarily have the power to take the case further, unless it gets to someone who is in a certain level of authority who actually decides to say, you know what, I'm going to take over this case and I'm going to make sure that it sees the light of day. So there are quite a lot of challenges. But like I said, the most important thing is to report it and to also make it known to the family that you are aware. Whether they're going to believe you or not, whether they're going to want to sweep it under the rug or not, it's important to speak.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I think about is, centralizing the conversation sometimes and the effort, actually all the time, primarily, centralizing that towards the victim. And I think one of the things or the survivor rather, one of the things I think about a lot is what would survivors typically need? If and the needs might differ because people are people, right? And some people maybe want to be left alone. Some people want everyone to come out fighting for them. What do they need? But also, what are some of those things that they might not want us to do, but that we still need to do? So what are some of those things that maybe we're not even thinking about, when we are in the shock moment or when we are in the moment of justice and I want to do the right thing for you? What would a survivor who is sitting there feeling all of the things they're feeling or not feeling all the things they should be feeling, what are some of the key things that they need or they hope for in that moment?
The most important thing that they need is support. And you need to be calm. Like I said, if you overreact, then the survivor might shut down. So I think I even made a post about it a couple of months ago. But if you do find out that a child has been sexually abused, the first thing you need is a quiet and safe place where they can openly speak to you. The second thing that you need is to plan out what the next steps will be, and you need to communicate these steps with them. You might find that they'll be reluctant, they'll be scared. Say it's a 5-year-old, or let's say a 7-year-old that has been raped by an uncle. They are going to have so many fears around anyone finding out about it because they probably care about the uncle. They love the uncle, even though he's done this atrocious things to them. They might have fears that what if he goes to jail? What if he gets into trouble? This is a child we're talking about. They might have all these fears, but you need to let them know that this is what's going to happen. I'm going to tell this person so that A, B, and C can happen. And then another thing is you need to give them reassurance that they haven't done anything wrong, because a child a lot of the times will feel like it was their fault that they were abused, because that's what the perpetrator wants the child to believe. So I would say the three most important things for me is a quiet and safe room where they can speak to you openly. The second thing, they need you to be calm and don't try to fill in sentences for them. Ask them a question, let them say what they need to say, go on to the next one. It would be great if you could record it or maybe even write down some notes. And the third thing is to just remind them that it's not their fault and you're going to do your best to make sure that they get out of that unsafe situation.
Okay, that's really helpful. So I'm just taking all of that. I feel like I should have my notes just writing. So now, and this is going to be my last question before we can talk about other things. Going forward, what does living with survivors of sexual assault in a healthy, helpful way look like? Because I think sometimes we talk about, you've gone through the process, or maybe you haven't, but things have happened, and we're at this point where life is starting to normalize or move on, and a child needs to go to school, or even an older person needs to go to work, and life is continuing. What are some of the helpful ways that we can actually sort of like live with survivors of sexual abuse? And would I be correct to say there's no expiration date? It's a lifelong journey that people sort of like have to take on. What does that look like for spouses, for family members who continue to look after the child, for friends? For even interviewers who sometimes want to ask so much about your story, and you're like, at which point do we stop, right? What does that look like?
I'm going to use myself as an example. I think for me, it looks like just having lots of empathy for them, continuing to ask them questions about how they're feeling, where are they, just being very attentive. And one thing that I really appreciate that my husband has done is that he literally just gives me a listening ear. I can go on, whether I'm crying or whatever it is, like he's just there and not necessarily like providing a solution to say, maybe you should try do this. That can also be quite annoying. Like, just listen to what I'm saying. That's all I need. But when it comes to taking care of a child that has been sexually abused, I think you need to definitely get them some kind of help. They need counseling, or they need a child therapist who can just help them process what they've been through. And it's also just continuing to have those body safety, consent, and boundary conversations with them, reminding them that their body is theirs, no one is allowed to touch them, reminding them that it wasn't their fault. I think it looks different for everyone, and it's one of those situations that you only really know once you're in it. That's how I always speak about parenting, to say, I always said that my child wasn't going to watch an hour of TV, and now he does, because sometimes you just need to do what you need to do, right? Yeah. Some situations you only really know how to handle them once you've been in that situation. But I think it's all the family around whoever has been abused also needs to get some kind of help and support as well, because it can also be extremely traumatizing, especially for a parent or a sibling or an aunt. It can be severely traumatizing, so they need support as well.
Yeah, and I know I said that was the last question, but there's one important question I wanted to ask about, normally when we talk about sexual abuse in children, we do, or even in people, we talk about it from the lens of the girl child or the woman. From the work that you've been doing, what are sort of like the stats looking like from just facts? I'm not even trying to say this is more prevalent, and I just really am curious to understand, what are the facts looking like from the girl versus boy child, sexual abuse, if we know any, or some of the ways we can identify if the boy child is actually being sexually abused, right? Because I think sometimes we can identify some of the signs in girls, but are we able to actually pay attention or see some of these signs in boys?
The signs are not that much different, to be honest. And I think the stats in boys are underreported because we often overlook the possibility of a boy child being abused. But a lot of young men and even older men have been sexually abused, and they're either not aware of it or they've just decided to never really speak about it because men can't get abused, right? But if you were a 13-year-old boy and you were dating a 18-year-old girl and you guys had sex, that was abuse because you were underage. But boys like to hype each other up around such things to say, yo, you're the man, like you slept with the older girl, you know? But how at 13 are you able to make a conscious decision to say, I'm going to have sex? You were probably manipulated into it. And also at 14, hormones are raging, right? So you are curious about all kinds of things, pornography. And so someone can come in and take advantage of the stage that you're in. But it is prevalent in boys as well. I know this is a bit of a controversial topic, but even R. Kelly was actually sexually abused as a boy. And so what you see is that oftentimes the perpetrator or a child that has been abused ends up becoming a perpetrator themselves. And I remember watching this video on YouTube. It was a documentary based in Khayelitsha because they have some crazy rape cases there. And there was a man who was basically going around and interviewing some of the rapists that were not in jail. And he would ask them about their childhood. How did you grow up? And a lot of them would say that they had been raped as young boys. And so they end up becoming rapists.
So basically, it's in our best interest to make sure that when rape happens, it is properly dealt with.
It is.
So that it does not perpetuate itself, going forward. But how do we then also have the, justice conversation around, of course, there are also victims who maybe didn't go on to, continue the pattern. What would you say is the difference between the victims who perpetuate the pattern and the victims who actually just don't perpetuate? Is there a difference that was maybe studied?
I think that's a question that maybe like a psychiatrist or psychologist can answer.
Okay.
It's like two young boys growing up in a household where the father is an alcoholic and he's abusive.
Okay.
The one will become an alcoholic and an abusive man himself, and the other will actually say, you know what, no, I don't want to become that.
Yeah.
How do you know, like, what those nuances in between, like what actually makes the difference between two young boys who are growing up in the exact same environment, going through the exact same thing, and yet they turn out to be totally different?
Yeah, does it come down to character? Does it come down to genetics? Does it come down to agency or choice? Or does it come down to something else? And I think oftentimes when we have the conversation, we are very focused on justice, which is absolutely important, because if justice was truly served, a lot of these things might be difficult to actually continue being perpetuated.
Right.
But I'm also interested in other factors, right? Is there something else that we're missing? Because how do you explain that man A has gone through a similar experience as man B, but then they come out differently?
Yeah.
There must be something else that maybe we're not seeing. There must be an invisible force. Or maybe there just must be simply choice of...
It does come down to choice, I believe, in some instances. But I'm a very spiritual person. So I also do believe that a lot of the times it is quite a spiritual thing that happens when a man or even a woman decides that they are going to become the very thing that broke them,
Yeah.
So you never really know. You never know how a child is going to turn out. You can only hope that they will eventually have the ability and the resources to do the necessary work.
Wow, that was heavy.
I know.
That was heavy. That was very heavy. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think, I want to now talk about some of your other work, your entrepreneurial work. You have done quite a few things. Zen nutrition is one of the things that come to mind. And I know that you talk a lot about well-being and wellness and looking after your body and, eating well and working out. And that kind of like really holistic lifestyle that sets us up for a healthy, a sustainable lived experience. Tell me about why that matters to you, and if honestly speaking, that is sustainable.
It is sustainable. It's not easy. It's a very bumpy road. For example, this year, I honestly have not been that disciplined in taking care of my body, and I can feel it. But the reason why I speak a lot about wellness is because it's actually going to the gym and eating well that helped me out of postpartum depression. So I didn't want to really go on any kind of medication to deal with the depression that I was going through at the time. So for me, gym and eating well it's done amazing things for me. And after you have a baby, you feel all kinds of things about your body. Like, this is now sagging when it used to sit a certain way. Now, hey, now you are asymmetrical, not symmetrical anymore. Your neck is dark. I remember my stomach was like extremely dark for like a good 6 to 9 months. Yep. Stretch marks that I never had before. And then obviously it starts to affect your relationship with your partner as well, because you don't feel good about yourself. And so when I started going to the gym, suddenly I was like, girl, you got it. I was like, the legs are looking good.
Yeah.
Your bum is sitting, where it's supposed to be sitting.
Okay.
And also like just the release of endorphins after a good workout. For me, it was, it's done wonders for me. I do need to go back to the gym this year again.
Yeah. And I think I love the benefits of the gym for what it does to the mind and to the body, right? But there's, something that sometimes can be a bit unsettling about the hypervigilance and hyper-attachment to our bodies looking young forever.
Right.
I remember when we were young, old people looked like old people. If all of us remember, our grandmothers, our mothers, people would look their age and no one was fighting anything. Do you think there's something about, our generation of people just fighting reality, fighting life, fighting our bodies? Or is there a part of this that feels like it's an evolution actually that we should embrace? We're trying to live better. We're trying to live longer. We're trying to lead healthier lives. Just because we've always known that, it doesn't mean we should keep it. How do we even sort of like wrestle with these two worlds when we sort of like feel like we're in the middle?
I don't feel like it's a wrestle between two worlds. I do believe that previous generations took really good care of their bodies.
Okay.
I think they ate a lot better than we do right now. The rise of Uber Eats and Mr. D, like, we are a generation that runs after convenience more than anything. I think for me, my issue is the rise of plastic surgery. And how, not that I'm against it, I'm not against it at all, but I'm starting to see that even amongst young girls, there is an expectation for them to look a certain way because their favorite influencer's waist is a certain size and their curves look a certain way and their nose is a certain shape. And because at times celebrities and influencers are not forthcoming about the procedures that they've had done, young people are growing up thinking that, hey, why don't I look that way? And so they go down this rabbit hole of plastic surgery and,
Yeah. So whose problem is it? If and that's not necessarily a stance I'm taking. I'm just trying to play both ends.
Yeah.
Whose problem is it if person A is taking agency in their body and says, I want plastic surgery because I'm not satisfied with part A of my body, and person B, the onlooker, says, oh, me, I want that for myself too, and they go and like, whose problem is it if someone envies someone else taking agency over their body?
I get you.
You get me?
I get you.
Okay, but then, okay, now that I need to get on both sides. And then on the other side is, at which point do we say, realistically speaking and practically speaking, these are the risks. Some of these procedures are quite pricey. There might be, I don't know much about them. There might be, safe and have proven to be. Some of them are pricey. And because of the exclusivity nature of them, is it possible that then some people end up being in risk because then they go for sort of like the cheaper alternatives, and maybe the health conversation can be had there.
Yeah.
It's such a tricky thing because I guess if someone has seen a loved one sort of like go through the dangers of, that kind of procedure, of course they have every right to feel, sad about the health implications. And then on the other hand, someone says, I felt really terrible and I had low self-esteem issues about my body for the longest time. And for the first time, I feel like I can come out and show the world, who it's almost like going to the salon and having your hair done. I think I do see some sort of, merit sometimes in both ends of the reasoning or of the concerns. But I do think that sometimes it's a bit of a case-to-case situation, because if there's a real health concern, can we just talk about that without feeling scared to say, maybe if you do it if you know that it's truly, truly safe. And when we say it's safe, what are the medical associations saying about that? Factually speaking, outside of our own feelings, because I think the conversation of agency is still important. Someone can still come back and say, do we really have agency? When we are this influenced, it's tricky.
You're reminding me of Cardi B. I don't know. So Cardi B, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago. She was a stripper, right? Before she became a. I don't. Did you know that?
Did.
Yeah. Okay. I was just making sure. So Cardi was a stripper before she became a musician.
Yeah.
And so during her stripper days, she went and she got. Can I say ass?
Yeah.
Oh, she got ass shots. But she went to like some dodgy, like uncertified place to get them, because obviously as a stripper, you have to look a certain way. And then a couple of years ago, she said that she was draining out her booty shots. But then she's still getting work done on her body now. Yeah. And for me, my question around this whole body image wellness thing is, where does it stop? Because I feel like once you start, it's quite difficult to stop, because it has become so easy to change a facial feature. It has become so easy to make your bum bigger or smaller, to get that lipo procedure done. But then where are you actually going to draw the line?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe when I think about it for myself, I would think it stops in two places. One is, as long as I'm not compromising my health, we can keep going.
Right.
Number two, as long as I think I have my bodily agency to say, I'm an adult who can make independent decisions about my body, and look a certain way. And if I want to change it, I can change without putting my health and my life at risk. I think I'm okay with that.
Right.
The nuance there is just that it's not always possible or always easy to actually keep going and keep going and keep going without any healthcare implications.
Yeah.
I think that's the nuance there. And I also think that different people do it for different reasons. Some people say, I just want to accentuate something. Some people say, I had body dysmorphia. Some people say, I can't remember who it was, but someone said, I had a feature that looked like my parent, and I hated my parent for whatever reason. So things change. And I think once you start thinking about the reasons why some people do certain things, it actually maybe makes you empathize with them a little bit more. And also just thinking, your body, your business, right?
No, listen, I have nothing against plastic surgery, so don't get me wrong. My thing is, you need to do it for the right reasons. Absolutely. It's like with gym, right? When I initially started gym, it's because I wanted to shed some baby fat. I wanted my waist to go back to what it was, of which it never did. I don't think it ever will. I wanted my thighs to look firmer because I wanted to look a certain way when I'm wearing certain outfits. And so I was going to the gym because I wanted to look a certain way. Yeah. And when I would reach that goal, I'd find something else that I want to fix. And then when I reach that goal, then I want to find something else that I can fix. Up until gym became a place of like just a therapy for me. Yeah. Do you get what I mean? Like where I actually stopped having certain goals to say, by in the next 3 months, I want my back muscles to show. I started going to the gym because I knew it was good for me. It made me feel good. Like I actually threw away all those goals that I had.
How many of us though just want to go to gym because gym, it's like eating your veggies.
Yeah.
It's like,
right.
It's like, not at all. For me, I know I should drink water, but I think I do love what you're saying. I love what you're saying for two reasons. One is, it is okay for people to want to fix aspects of themselves that they maybe haven't fully embraced. But it's also okay to get to a point where you say, I think I'm all right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think I'm all right. there are things that matter that maybe stopped mattering. I've had a change of heart, or I've just seen that maybe this is not sustainable. The way I've been doing is not sustainable. And I think for different people, they always get to their realization or their moment of reckoning at different points and from different triggers.
Sorry to cut you, but a lot of the times your insecurities literally come from a person that you have compared yourself to. So sometimes an insecurity is not that it's just an insecurity that came out of nowhere. It's because it's either at that time society's trend is BBL.
Right.
So you suddenly look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, whoa, my bum is actually flat. Yeah. It's not flat, it's just not a BBL bum. I see. But then that's where your insecurity comes from. Yeah. Like those, English noses, like us, but so we call it the English nose. Suddenly, English noses are in fashion, and you look at your nose and you're like, my nose is kind of flat. Yeah. That's where the insecurity comes from. And I think that's where my issue is, that you really need to sit down with any insecurity that you have and ask yourself, where does it come from?
Right. I love that so much.
Where does it come from? Do I really have to change this part of my body? Yeah. Or is it because I saw Liz with some sexy toned legs and now suddenly I'm like, no, my legs are not toned enough.
A little bit.
Exactly.
Is there something that, when you do interviews and you've done really interesting work, and there's that one thing where you're like, I want to talk about this thing, but no one ever asks me. Mm-hmm. Is there something that sits on your chest that you just want to share about yourself, about the world, about your work, about anything?
Not really. I think I kind of already know, like going into an interview, what the interview is about. Like even before today, like you let me know that this is primarily about Set in Motion. Yeah. So I knew that it was going to be about Set in Motion. Yeah. And if other things come up in the conversation, then so be it.
Then I think we're happy.
We're happy.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really, really adore your work in Set in Motion. I think it's so important. I think please continue doing that work. The world is your oyster.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.